This is a legacy episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast, originally released as part of the Lesbian Talk Show podcast group. Some references may be obsolete. The show looks at lesbian-relevant themes in history and literature, has interviews and discussions about current historical fiction with queer female characters, including fantastic versions of the past, and presents new original historical fiction for your enjoyment. Last week, we had Samantha Rajaram on the show to talk about her own writing. She's returned this week to talk about a few books that she's particularly enjoyed or that really influenced her work. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So, why don't we plunge into the books?
Sure. So I would say probably one of the most influential books for me was the book that I wrote my master's thesis on, which is Audre Lorde's Zami. And there's so many reasons why I loved it, but part of it is she's just such a strong political voice, and how she connects queerness with her political agency and voice was so powerful to me in graduate school. And I think, there's certain books that just sort of percolate inside of you. And for me, that book is one of those books for sure.
Because it's a book that's been around for quite a while, why don't you remind the listeners sort of what it's about?
Yeah, I know. I haven't read it in a number of years, but it's basically her memoir about how she sort of navigated queerness along with becoming a writer, as well as being a woman of color.
Yeah. I'm familiar with it, but I don't think I've ever read more than just excerpts.
Okay. I love her writing. She just has such a powerful voice to me. And as somebody who is a woman of color, also navigating, issues of queerness and my own political voice and beliefs and all that, I just find it so comforting to read somebody who is so self-assured.
So what's your next book?
My next book would probably be a book that's quite difficult to get. It's by Kamala Das, and it's called My Story. It's another memoir. She is an Indian writer, very political as well. And I think one of the things that I loved about this book is the way she talks about being lesbian. And she goes to these private schools in India. They're all, they keep the genders separate. And so it's an all-girls school that she attends. And she has these wonderful excerpts where she talks about her crushes on different classmates. And I had never read anything like that by an Indian writer.
Yeah.
And it was just revelatory to me because she just has this wonderful, strong voice in that book. And, Indian culture is pretty repressive, particularly with respect to women. It's very patriarchal culture. It hasn't, it's changed. It's made some changes, but, it's still pretty clear to me that, that the structure is more or less the same. And so reading a book like that when I was in college just had a huge effect on me. Yeah.
It's always important to find works that you feel you can see yourself in some way.
Absolutely. Yes. And that was a very powerful book. And each chapter features a short excerpt of one of her poems. She's primarily a poet, which I also loved. That was a very important book to me. Still is.
Okay. Do you have another one?
I think my final book would be, really anything by James Baldwin. I started reading him when I think I was 15. And another writer whose voice to me is so unforgettable and so relevant even today, certainly today. And I continue to read, short excerpts from his books that are on my shelf, just as a way of reminding myself of the sort of world I want to live in and what I'm fighting for myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll put links to all of those works in the show notes for this. And thank you so much, Samantha, for sharing some books that influenced you.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Lesbian Historic Motif podcast. See the show notes for links to people and topics. Most shows will have a transcript linked as well. If you have a book announcement, a topic suggestion, or might like to appear on the show, please drop me an email. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and consider supporting our Patreon.